I'm Pascal, and I'm the Director of Threat Intelligence for Radware. In the next 15 minutes, I will take you through my thoughts and what I believe were the top recent threats and trends in malicious activity and attacks, aiming to answer the questions which challenges should be top of mind for keeping businesses online and growing them in the coming months and years. Now, to ensure flexibility in operations and scalable growth, organizations have grown into distributed multi-cloud ecosystems that provide many access points and leverages their own and third-party infrastructure and services. The attack surface has grown considerably throughout the last few years, driven by needs to support remote workforces, migrating applications to the cloud, and the digitalization of processes and automations. To understand the threat and create your risk profile as an organization, you need to understand the actors, who they are, what their objectives are, knowing how they typically perform attacks, which tactics and techniques they leverage, and what their objectives and skill levels are. An attacker requires something that is of value to you, something he can impact, destroy, or steal. Now, who are the actors behind those crimes and what are they after? What is motivating them? Organized crime, probably one of the most visible lately, especially through ransomware campaigns. They're driven by money, stealing, laundering, illegal trading, extortion, and they leverage a lot on the lone wolves that are also part of the community and that are driven by money. Those are highly skilled hackers for hire that provide their services to the organized crime to leverage them in their ransom as a service platform. There's also nation states, typically driven by geopolitics, can use attacks for cyber physical warfare, but also it's about disruption and causing chaos, maybe causing economic impact, influence elections, but also stealing in like North Korea, for example. Competitors, they are out for a competitive advantage, of course. They might scrape your prices or get access to your website, automate systems to undercut your prices consistently, or they might be setting up attacks to destroy your reputation. They might be out for stealing copyrighted and intellectual property. Then there's the hacktivists, which are driven by an ideology. They are out there for destruction or defacement, disruption of websites, typically to make a point. Then there's the angry people, which might be angry customers or disgruntled employees, and they are driven by revenge. Those are emotions that are flaring up typically. It happens very sudden, very short-lived, but they might be out to damage your reputation because they're unhappy about something that happened recently to them. And then there's the skits. We call them skits, script kiddies, but driven by e-fame. They want to brag. They like to troll, like invade Zoom meetings and make fun, well, what they call fun, showing off to their friends what they can do, but also gaming, having an advantage in gaming, like when they have multiplayer online gaming, they might try to find out the IP addresses of their competitors and take an advantage by attacking them or disrupting their services. Now let's consider one of the first categories that I discussed in the threat actors, which is the organized crime. And I talked about ransomware as a service, and ransomware as a service, it has a whole ecosystem on the underground. It consists of a full supply chain from people who provide remote access, which we call the remote access brokers, who are the ones who can find credentials to a server, or they have leak badges that they buy, they verify them, or they do credential stuffing to find new credentials that are able to breach an organization. And these are passed on typically to what we call the initial access brokers. And those provide the access, they do the recon, they escalate privileges, move laterally in the network of an organization. And then they sell that network access to a ransomware affiliate that is actually leveraging the malware, the crypto-locking malware that's provided by the ransomware operators, plans the malware, encrypts the system, might be exfiltrating data before he does the encryption, and he locks up the network and then provides that stolen sensitive information to the ransomware operator. The ransomware operator is where the organized crime sits, and those are the top of the food chain. They are the ones who make the malware, the crypto-locking malware, and also provide the infrastructure, the websites for announcing who has been a victim, and also providing information to the press of what information they found in sensitive leaks, and also provide a negotiation with the victim and try to get the payout. Once the payout is done, the ransomware operator will provide the affiliates with a part of the ransom payment. So REvil, for example, is known to give their affiliates between 30 and 40% after a couple of successful ransom payments. And DarkSide even give them 75 to 90%, depending on the size of the ransom. If you know that ransoms are up to 4 millions, or can be up to $4 million, then 90% is a good amount of money to be made by a ransomware affiliate. So there's a lot of lone wolves out there and a lot of crime groups that would be happy to be an affiliate to a ransomware operator. Ransomware has been very successful since the last 2 years, and according to a survey, 83% of ransomware victims have paid ransom who actually were impacted and had no choice. Whether to pay or not to pay, of course, it's always better not to pay. But in some cases, restoring for backup can be more costly, can take more time. You'd never know if your backup was good. And also, we know like operators like Conti, for example, they at some point were looking for attackers that were specialized in backups and in destroying backups. So they might also be able to get access and destroy backups. Now, the US Treasury said that they tied 5.2 billion in BTC transactions already to ransomware payments. And that shows the popularity. And that also means that when somebody has success in their ransom, well, others will join the group. And that's how we get to the whole problem that ransomware was exploding. And it's not limited to ransomware. There's also another extortion campaign, which is called ransom DOS, denial of service attacks to extort people. There's nothing new. We already know this going on for more than 14 or 15 years. However, since August of 2020, it has been accelerating. It has been a persistent part of the threat landscape. So we've seen multiple campaigns, and in the beginning, the actors that were trying to extort organizations were using APT names to instill fear in their victims, and they called themselves Fancy Bear or Lazarus. One even in May called himself Fancy Lazarus to make a maximum fear, so combining the Russian and the North Korean APT. But then later on, so more recently in September and October, we saw actors coming and leveraging names from ransomware operators, because everybody hears about REvil, everybody knows about several groups like DarkSide, and they want to use that name to instill fear. In the last campaign that we saw that was targeting email providers, a person who went by the name of Cursed Patriarch, which is atypical. Typically, they come with a group name. So the actions in September REvil were targeting specifically VoIP providers in UK and Canada, and they had severe impacts on telecom systems and on voice communications. Moving from the more organized crime to the skilled attackers, here's an example of Erratic, which is the alias of Paige Thompson, who was a former Amazon employee who had good knowledge of how AWS Cloud works. And she built an automation or tool that scanned AWS for vulnerable cloud servers, leveraging a server-side request forgery attack that allows her to actually, through a published or an exposed web server, get access to the AWS metadata service. And through that metadata service, is able to extract credentials that you can then use to query other resources like S3 buckets, where typically those servers have access to. Now, a server typically has access to all the data. There's very limited restrictions on which data a server can access. The different roles and permissions are typically enforced by the application running on the server. So that means that page had access to a lot of data that was stored in S3 buckets. Now moving on to not really another category of threat actors, but more of a tactic, which is supply chain attacks. And I think that everybody remembers that we started the year with SolarWinds Orion software being backdoored and being supplied to many of the top US government, but also global organizations that were using Orion software to monitor their networks, and got all backdoored through that one attack, to that one source code injection that a nation state actor did or was able to do in the DevOps and in the supply chain of SolarWinds. But there was also the Kaseya attack that was on the 4th of July. So during that holiday period, ransomware group was able to get access to Kaseya and infect their supply chain with ransomware that then infected all their partners. And through those partners, they got access to different machines. And millions of machines were infected across the world, from many smaller organizations to medium-sized organizations, some of them who didn't have a backup. So it was a very bad situation at that time. And it's not like supply chain attack is something new. We have seen that leveraged in the open source for quite some time, and especially in those ecosystems like Python and Node, where the packages are actually building the whole ecosystem and part of the success of those languages for prototyping, but also used in DevOps, in automation, in many different tools. And Sonatype actually found that those number of attacks to open source increased by 650% this year. Another threat that we have seen growing this year are 0 days and known vulnerabilities. So exploiting vulnerabilities that have been recently exploited, and especially the time between disclosure of a vulnerability and the exploit itself has been shrinking. Now, a 0 day is a separate category. Those are the vulnerabilities that are unknown. Some of them, like the Microsoft Exchange server earlier this year, was known and communicated between the researcher who found the vulnerability and Microsoft, but somewhere in the process, the vulnerability was leaked, and before the patches were officially out from Microsoft, a threat actor was already out there in the wild, exploiting that vulnerability and attacking any Exchange server that is out there. They could not be updated yet because the patch was not out. So that's a 0 day, and there has been an increase in 2021 in 0 days. And then we have the vulnerability exploits, which to some extent are so bad that actually the CISA recently created a catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities and ordered agencies to patch them. So that shows the importance. Note that some of those vulnerabilities, not only recent vulnerabilities, but also older vulnerabilities, are still being exploited on the internet. And that brings us to IoT search engines, where there's no more hiding on the internet. Whenever you have a server on the internet and it is vulnerable, it can easily be discovered using those search engines. So IoT search engines are like Google, but to search what we call the deep web. So those IP addresses that are not indexed by Google, that do not contain websites, but are running other services. And those services can be automation services like Modbus, or better protocols like Modbus, but can also be web servers, can be Hadoop Yarn backends, can be VMware, vCenter access, where people think that the IP address is enough to hide the servers and use the IP address as a password. But that does not work anymore. So hiding on the internet is impossible. Search engines are scanning the whole internet all the time, and they are indexing it, and it's very easy to search. So wrapping up, what I believe will are and will be the challenges for the coming months or years for security and for organizations. It's first of all the increasing infrastructure and application complexity, all the different attack surfaces and all the different clouds that we're using, remote access, the automation system, the APIs that we depend on. It all increases our attack surface and provides opportunity for bad guys to find holes in that threat surface. Now attackers are getting more sophisticated and better organized, and part of that is also defending that we see ourselves defending against human operated attacks. And it's one thing about automated attacks, but when there's human intelligence involved and also human persistence, and especially also the last point, the incentive has become so big. If you see how much millions they can make from a single successful ransomware attack, affiliates are really ready to go the extra mile and to keep on searching for that small gap or small goal or that one vulnerability that isn't patched to get into the networks. Brings me to the end of my 15 minutes, and I would like to thank you very much, and have a nice day.